The heavy steel door hissed as the hyperpressure bay sealed out the rest of the facility. High Proctor Zalvorn pulled the massive iron lever down to lock the vault mechanisms. Outside the thick viewport, the mountain air was thin and freezing, but inside this testing chamber, the atmosphere began to grow thick and heavy. The air tasted like warm pennies. 12 elite shock troopers stepped into the center of the room, their massive segmented armor plates locking into place with a series of sharp clicks. The Academy logs do not clear files that break the scale. Let the ledger update before we look at the next trial. The floor tiles vibrated as the massive pneumatic pumps beneath the deck plates started to spin. Zalvorn turned a brass dial on his console to increase the air density. The 12 alien troopers checked their sidearms and stood in a straight line, their heavy carapaces reflecting the green glow of the pressure gauges. At the very end of the roster, Q stood the human girl, Cadet Miller. Her uniform was clean, but her heavy leather ground boots were scuffed and gray from field mud. Long, frayed fiber laces trailed loosely from her left ankle, scraping against the metal floor every time she shifted her weight. Zalvorn pressed the main activation button to begin the first test sequence. The digital monitor on his console lit up, showing a simple grid that tracked the vital signs of every asset inside the chamber. The baseline weight of the air began to climb rapidly. The 12 shock troopers adjusted their stance, their joint seals whistling as internal micropumps fought to match the thickening room. Miller did not move. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on a small scratch near the top of the reinforced concrete wall. The barometric pressure gauge crept past the standard safety line. Zalvorn watched the dials spin toward 40 atmospheres of weight. Inside the vault, the air became so thick that it distorted the light, making the far corner of the room look fuzzy and distant. The internal thermal plates inside the trooper's armor began to groan under the force. Centurion Vale, one took a short, raspy breath, his antennae pressing flat against his carapaced skull as his suit tried to regulate his oxygen intake. Miller blinked once, then reached up to scratch her nose with the back of her sleeve. The pneumatic pumps screamed louder as Zalvorn pushed the control bar forward again. The heavy atmosphere was now thick enough to slow down rapid physical movements. The 12 elite troopers began to buckle, their knees bending slightly as their suits expanded to absorb the crushing load. One of the shock troopers stumbled backward, his metal boot heel striking the steel deck with a dull thud before he forced himself back into formation. Miller remained perfectly upright. She looked down at her left foot, noticed the loose trailing fiber lace, and let out a quiet sigh that barely fogged her visor. The room reached 60 atmospheres of barometric weight. The structural panels along the ceiling began to twist, their metal seams weeping tiny drops of gray lubricant under the strain. The 12 troopers were visibly deflated now, their massive shoulder guards sinking as the internal air bladders in their suits failed to maintain pressure. Cadet Kresh dropped to both knees, his mandibles snapping together in rapid clicks while his biosuit flashed a bright red warning light. Miller took a single step forward, ignoring the heavy air completely, and sat down on the empty metal bench near the entry hatch. Zalvorn checked the status lights on his desk. Every single safety light was blinking yellow, indicating that the chamber had entered a lethal stage for standard organic lung structures. The 12 elite alien shock troopers were no longer standing in a line. They were hunched over, their heavy carapaces cracking along the joint seams as the pressure squeezed their chests. The sound of fracturing resin filled the bay. Miller did not look at the breaking soldiers. She leaned down, picked up the loose ends of her frayed fiber cords, and began to loop them over each other with steady fingers. The gauge touched 80 atmospheres. The air inside the room was now a crushing wall of pure physical weight. The 12 elite shock troopers collapsed completely, their heavy biosuits deflating like wet leather as their internal regulators ruptured under the force. White-hot heat spikes flared across the monitoring grid as their armor systems short-circuited and died. Zalvorn reached for the emergency vent lever, his own carapaced fingers trembling against the handle. He looked at the screen, then stopped. Miller was still sitting on the bench, casually pulling the loops of her shoelaces into a tight double knot. The primary monitoring grid began to glitch, its green display lines flickering wildly. Zalvorn tapped the side of the terminal to clear the distortion, but the layout remained broken. On the tracking screen, 12 bright red markers showed the high thermal heat of the failing alien suits. On Miller's designated position, there was no red marker. The thermal lens array showed nothing but a flat, gray void over her seat. The machine did not register an exception or a failure. It simply recorded the ambient temperature of an empty room, as if no living body sat on the bench at all. Zalvorn adjusted the scanner sensitivity dials, but the readout remained a perfect 0. The automated system could not find a target to measure because her biology did not fight the heavy room. Inside the bay, the human girl patted the top of her secured boot with her palm to check the fit. She stood up from the metal bench, walked past the deflated suits of the 12 elite shock troopers, and approached the internal intercom speaker near the glass. The automated safety program triggered a forced cycle reset. A loud mechanical whistle blew 3 times as the massive exhaust vents opened, pulling the dense air out of the vault in a single, roaring rush. The heavy steel door unlatched with a deep click. Miller stepped out into the cool air of the processing concourse, completely unaffected by the sudden drop in density. She shook out her ankles, looked directly at Zalvorn through his viewport, and let out a wide yawn. Zalvorn did not speak. His segmented arms remained locked over the control console as the medical extraction drones hurried into the empty chamber to clear the ruined armor plates. Miller adjusted the collar of her jacket and pointed toward the main hallway. She asked the automated intake terminal what time the next shift rotation started. The terminal flashed a green light, but did not give an answer. Zalvorn turned back to his station and opened the primary academy database file. The screen prompted him for a standard physical defense rating code, but the regular numbers did not fit what the sensors had recorded. He moved his fingers across the input keys, deleted the old entry blocks, and typed a new classification label into the system. The screen saved the updated profile under the name of the human asset. The green cursor on the monitor continued to blink against the black background. Zalvorn closed the terminal door, leaving the silent room completely dark. Outside the viewport, the distant mountain peak was white with winter snow.